I worry about the days if we ever get a studio and do this like full script, like full high res, two of us sitting in the same room together, because I don't know what you wear underneath the desk, but like I have a full koozie blanket.
Oh, I'm just not wearing pants. It's fine.
That's not surprising. Not surprising at all, but I am eternally cold, and I don't think people understand how cold I am when we record these episodes. Like my hands are shaking until it
Well,
gets
and to
warm
be
again.
fair, you're sitting in the basement. You're in the
I am.
basement.
I am. So it is freezing down here, but you'll never know what I'm
Well,
wearing on
you
my
know what I
lower
say to
body.
that? You know what I say to that? Pants are for chumps.
Mm, well, call me a chump.
33, 1, 0. Main event of the evening. Wednesday and half past the hour.
It's Tuesday, and you're listening to Murder Unscripted.
What is up, crime crew? Welcome back to another episode of Murder Unscripted, the most immersive podcast ever in the history of podcasts. There, I claimed it. Are
Ooh,
you happy? I didn't just.
you did claim it.
I am your host, Ed Hydock, along with my bestie, my partner in true crime, Melissa Spivey.
Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back indeed. And today is going to look a little different, Melissa, because as you know, obviously better than anyone, this is part two of the case you started last week. And I got to say, it's wild. I'm looking forward to this because you had me on the edge of my seat. And I'm going to skip over the usual housekeeping stuff so we can get right into it. But do you want to give everyone a kind of a quick refresher about the case that we talked about, that we started talking about last week?
Absolutely, I do. All right, so last Tuesday, I started telling you what has become known as the case of the Vanishing Blonde, which is also the name of the amazing Vanity Fair article about this case that I mentioned last week. So, this case, we are in Miami in 2005, and we are at the Airport Regency Hotel. And our victim, actually, she's our survivor because she's a badass babe. But our survivor has endured a vicious sexual assault that left her alive barely, but she was severely injured. So, in addition to police trying to figure out who attacked our survivor, they also had to figure out how in the world did the perp transfer our survivor out of the hotel without security surveillance catching any of it. And the Miami-Dade PD had done like their damnedest to collect evidence and follow leads, but eventually they had exhausted their resources and basically had to put the case like up on the shelf. So now we enter PI, private investigator Ken Brennan. And Ken, I'm blushing. Ken is a Harley riding foul mouthed former DEA agent who has a heart of gold and a serious hatred of bad guys. When Ken took this case, he started at the very beginning by tediously and painstakingly watching every frame of security footage, and soon Ken is able to solve the mystery of how our survivor was transferred out of the hotel. Our perp put her body in a suitcase. But now Ken needs to figure out who is our perp. And my goodness, do we have an adventure to go on in this episode? So, Ed, are you ready for part two of the case of the Vanishing Blonde?
I am very ready. I'm excited for this. This is a very cool story.
It's such a good story. All right. So, directly where I left off, Ken had just met with the hotel people, aka the people who hired him, and he had presented his theory about this large, bespectacled man who had been seen chatting with Inna prior to the assault. So Ken theorized that the man had attacked Inna, put her in his suitcase, wheeled her through the hotel, out to his car, and then dumped her in that vacant lot where she was later found. And the hotel bigwigs, they're not really on board with Ken's theory, but they do allow him to continue investigating. Their main concern is, we don't want to pay this woman a ton of money. So, like, they kind of weigh the pros and cons, like, what's more expensive, Ken or paying out? So they decide to let him keep going. So now Ken has to figure out who the heck is this large man seen in the elevator footage with Inna. So his first move, Ken refers to the hotel guest list, but unfortunately it's not of much use to him. There's like so many people on the list, so many people in and out of the hotel, and Ken knows that he's up against the impossible. Like, he has to figure out who this random dude is, and none of the hotel employees even remember seeing him, let alone knowing anything about him. And if you think about it, like, even if they did remember seeing him, they probably wouldn't know his name or his room number, or like, he could have been there staying with someone. Like, he might not even be the primary guest who checked in. Like, he could have been their
Right.
guest. And
Right.
when Ken attempts to go through the check in records, it's just a bust. And hotel protocol dictates that the hotel staff is to photocopy the room holder's driver's license. But A, that policy is very loosely followed, if at all. And B, of the few IDs that they did photocopy, they did it all on, like, I guess, an old copier. It's like black and white. It's all pixelated and blurry. So you
Yeah.
can't even tell, like, who anybody is. So
Yeah.
that's just a waste of time. But our man Ken is not giving up. I don't even think giving up is in his vocabulary. In the 2020 episode on this case, the reporter asks him, quote, "Is it true that you've never ever taken a sick day?" And Ken confirms it. Like, talk about dedication.
Yeah, they don't make them like that anymore. Today, these days, it's like, I have 3 mental health days, 36 hours of PTO that I'd like to stagger against a company holiday and then supplement with my unused vacation time. Like, am I like making that up? I feel like that's the world now.
I mean, I take as many mental health days as I possibly can.
You were included in that statement. I'm talking about,
Oh, fair. So, yet again, Ken returns to the good old security camera footage. Maybe, just maybe, there will be another clue. And sure enough, Ken finds one. Kinda, sorta. He sees the suspect walking with and often talking to another guy. And this other man, he's also black, but he's a lot shorter and he's in much better shape than our suspect. Because remember, our suspect is like 6'4", 300 plus pounds. He's a
it's
big dude.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ken notices that this second man is wearing a t-shirt that says Mercury. So Ken doesn't know what to make of this, at least for now, but he does take note of it. I mean, Mercury, that could be the planet, that could be like the element, that could be the car, that, you know, like
I think
could
it's
be
a
so
boat.
many
It's a
things.
boat motor too. I think.
Is it?
I think
Maybe.
so. Yeah.
So Ken continues watching the footage and he sees that our suspect and this other man, who I'm just going to start calling Mr. Mercury, they're heading towards the hotel's restaurant and bar. So Ken switches video feeds and watches the two men walk into the restaurant together. And in this shot, Ken can see that Mr. Mercury has an ID badge around his neck. So Ken is like, oh my God, this could be it. So he zooms in as close as possible, but the end result is just like way too pixelated to be of any use.
That's not surprising at all, though. But what would surprise me is if they had a camera high tech enough in 2005 that could read the name tag. So that would be impressive. So this is kind of par for that's expected.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you, but if this were me, I would probably see this as a dead end and then I would give up and like get a snack. But Ken, There are no snack breaks for Ken, and they're certainly not giving up, especially not over a pixelated image. So, this fucking baller, can you guess what he does? He calls up NASA.
Of course he does.
Of course he does, right? Like, this is Ken mother effing Brennan, okay? So he probably has like NASA on speed dial. Let's be real. So he hits up NASA and he's like, here's my picture. What can you do to enhance this photo? But unfortunately, NASA is of no help.
He should use Canva. They have a pretty sweet photo enhancer. I use it all the time for the pod.
They definitely do. I don't think Canva was around in 2005,
Oh, yeah.
unfortunately.
Right.
So NASA hears him out, and then once the NASA guy gets the information on the make and model of the camera, he or she realizes that the footage can't be cleared up like any more than what Ken had done. So unfortunately, this ID badge is a dead end. So just like in part one, we're taking one step forward, but then we're taking 2 steps back. So for the millionth time, Ken goes back to the tapes. He goes back to the footage of big guy perpetrator and Mr. Mercury entering the hotel restaurant. And at one point, Mr. Mercury kind of turns to the side to like let someone pass him. And at this frame in the tape, Ken can kind of see the back of his shirt. And there is like printing on it, but it's kind of a weird font and it's hard to make out. So Ken can see that the main word on the shirt starts with a V and ends with an O. So Ken's best guess, after zooming in and zooming out and rechecking like every angle that he can, he thinks that the back of this Mercury shirt says Verado. Verado. So he's like, all right, I have the word Mercury and I have Verado. What the hell does this all mean? So he Googles the 2 words, and while NASA may have let Ken down, you know Google doesn't play. And the top result is about a new boat engine called
I told you.
the
I told
Verado,
you. I can
made
see 'em.
by Mercury Marine.
I can picture them. They're these big black motors they're outboard motors off the back of a boat, and it says Mercury real big. I didn't know Verado was I don't know the model numbers, but that makes total sense.
Well, I wasn't going to tell you. Jeez, we weren't there yet in the story.
All right.
But yes, Verado was a new boat engine made by Mercury Marine. So if you Google Mercury Verado today, you know how you get that Google AI overview kind of thing?
Yeah, it's like summarizes what you need to know.
Yes. Well, Google's AI overview says about Mercury Verado, quote, Mercury Marine is a Brunswick Corporation division and a leading global manufacturer of marine propulsion systems, specializing in outboard motors, stern drives, and inboard engines, as well as parts, accessories, and smart craft technology, end quote. Oh, fun fact, in addition to the boats and boat engines and such, the Brunswick Corporation also makes equipment for other recreational activities like bowling, and they also make billiards equipment.
Yeah, well, I knew Brunswick. That's on every bowling pin I've ever seen.
I don't think I've ever paid attention.
Yeah, they're so far away. Okay. And you're never going to
I
hit 'em.
know, true. Back to the boats. So Ken does a little bit more digging and finds out that there was a big boat expo in Miami when Inna was attacked.
Oh man, that's actually an amazing discovery, and it makes me think right away that this was someone from out of town, which always adds to the difficulty in solving these cases when the people aren't local. You know what I mean? Because they can come and
Mhm.
go, and they're gone before you even know what happened, and it makes me wonder if whoever was in town for this expo then met up with Ina somewhere, asked her for sex, and that's kind of what happened.
I guess we'll see, because I'm not going to tell you, even if you were right.
Hmm.
So, Ken is thinking like maybe the man in the Mercury t-shirt worked for Mercury, and maybe his large buddy did as well. And maybe they just so happened to stay at the Airport Regency Hotel. So Ken calls the Brunswick Corporation. They're headquartered in Illinois, and he speaks to their head of security, a lovely gentleman. I decided he's a lovely gentleman.
No.
And his name is Alan Spearling. So Ken explains the situation and asks Alan, during that 2005 boat show, did the Mercury employees stay at the airport Regency? Alan says no, they had stayed at some other hotel. So Ken's like, oh, like he was so hoping for that. And he's like,
Yeah.
huh.
Because we know that we do, but we don't know the guy carrying the suitcase was a guest. We just know he was at the hotel. We never proved that he stayed there. So I guess this.
True. But, once again, he thinks he's going in the right direction. And then it's a, nah, sorry, bro.
Mhm.
So Ken's next question, he's like, huh, all right, well, what about the crew that would have been responsible for like setting up your displays at the expo? And Spearling again tells him no. And I'm sure at this point, Ken is like, what the actual hell? Like, he's got to be so frustrated.
Yeah.
But he has one more question for Alan. Who the hell had those shirts? Like, who were those shirts given to?
That's something I never considered because think about how many promotional t-shirts. Like I have a ton, just like Bill's Lawn Care service doesn't necessarily mean I work for Bill's Lawn Care or that I even use Bill's Lawn Care, it's some t-shirt that I acquired somewhere. So it could be somebody who was simply attending this convention and that makes the suspect pool endless.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like I've got a ton of random t-shirts. I've never been to wherever they're from, but
Right.
somehow I acquired them.
Right.
So Alan's like, I'm not sure, but he said he would do some digging and see what he can find. So Ken hangs up, and I'm sure he's like, yeah, okay, I'll never hear from that guy again. But 2 weeks later, Ken's phone rings. It's the head of security, our lovely gentleman, Alan Spearling. And he's like, ask and you shall receive. Those exact shirts were specific to one group of boat show employees.
Wow.
The food service workers.
Super cool.
Right? And like, how cool is that this guy was like, yeah, I'll look into it. And he actually got back to him.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's awesome.
Most people would have been like, yeah, sure, I'll get back to you. Click.
Yeah. Talk to you never.
Yeah. So Ken is freaking pumped, but our boy Alan is not done yet. He can even provide the name of the company who those food service employees worked for. It was a company called Center Plate, and their Google AI overview, it says that Center Plate is a company that provides event hospitality services, including food, beverage, and merchandise to sport facilities, convention centers, and other entertainment venues in North America and the UK.
They're those monsters that charge you when you go down to the stadium to see a baseball game or basketball game, you pay $57 for chicken fingers. That's those bastards.
Yeah, it is. And like your beers, like literally you have to sign, like it's like a second mortgage.
It's $25 for a beer. It's insane.
That's so ridiculous. Well, obviously, this is a fantastic lead. Like, Alan, you freaking came through, bud. Alan's great.
Damn right he did.
Right? So Ken's next step is to contact Centerplate. So he does some research and he discovers that Centerplate had employees literally like all over the country. So Ken calls their head of HR department and HR is able to confirm that they did have some employees who lodged at the airport Regency.
Oh man, that's great for the case.
But they had hired over 200 people for that event, and those employees have been brought in from like literally all over the country, several different states, which is not great for Ken. But our MU MVP is not deterred, because of course he's not. So he describes the suspect to the HR person and says, quote, somebody has to remember a big black guy, 300 pounds at least, in glasses, end quote. So HR person says they would ask around. They hang up, and yet again, Ken thinks, I'm never going to hear from him again. 1 week later, Ken's phone rings. It's Centerplate's HR person. And just like our helpful head of security at the Brunswick Corp, HR guy, he has the tea and he is ready to spill.
Excellent.
He says that he asked around and there were a few people who did remember working with a man who fit the description.
But who's the guy? I feel like you're starting to hone in, but like a name. Someone give us a name.
Ooh, well, you see, that's the thing. They remember working with him, but they don't remember his name.
So frustrating.
I told you this was a roller coaster ride of a case.
I feel like I'm working the case. I feel like I'm working this as a cold case and I'm so close to solving it. Like, I just want to know the end of the story.
I know. When I was like reading that article, I was like, oh, this has to be it. And then I'm like, look at the little scroll bar. And I'm like, what?
It's like not even
There's
close.
so much left. So people do remember our suspect, but they don't know his name. But one of the people did remember that when our big guy suspect was originally hired to work for Centerplate, it was at a minor league baseball stadium in Louisiana. More specifically, it was Zephyrs Field, which was where the New Orleans Zephyrs played.
I actually am familiar with that location from the summer. It's summer of 2023 when I was down and doing all those Bayou episodes for Cold Case Files. And I think I think it's something else now, not a baseball stadium, but it's great because now at least Ken has like a home base for this. That was an accidental pun. A home base.
Pun intended, home base.
But it's good for Ken.
Yeah, it is. But hold that thought. Remember, our case originally takes place in February of 2005. Ken takes over in November of 2005, and at this point in the case, we are well into 2006. And what horrific natural disaster devastated the city of New Orleans in August of 2005?
Hurricane Katrina. And you know what? It's interesting because I never put two and two together. I knew it was Zephyr Field, but I don't think I was ever explained why it was not Zephyr Field anymore. And now it makes complete sense. Because I think it's like a rugby stadium now.
Well, you are correct, because in present day, it is a major league rugby stadium, and the stadium is called Gold Mine on Airline.
That's what it is.
So, yes, so that is located in Metairie, which is a suburb of New Orleans, and this community was just absolutely ravaged by Katrina and left devastated. And the residents were all forced to evacuate. The floodwaters reached heights of 8 feet, like in this area, and these floods lasted for 2 weeks. So at the time of our case, residents of Metairie could have been anywhere. So again, at this point, it seems like the universe is against Ken, and especially against Inna. It's like Ken is chasing shadows at this point, and he never can quite catch one. And the hotel people who are paying his bill, they're frustrated. They pretty much just want Ken to conclude that Inna was a sex worker and it was one of her Johns who attacked her, and therefore not the hotel's problem.
It's so freaking sad to know that this stuff goes on behind the scenes. And it's also eye-opening, though, and an important part of the story. Like last week with Patrick Dennehy, we have this young man who was missing and later found to be murdered. And then all you had was damage control going on behind Baylor's curtain, with Coach Bliss and just the scandal and the cover-ups just to cover your own ass. And it's awful.
No, you're right. And I feel like, thank goodness Ken got this case and not maybe a shady PI with less morals than Ken, because Ken's biggest thing here is getting the bad guy off the streets. Like, that's what he's worried about. He's not worried about whether the hotel has to pay someone money or not. So, all right, I know I haven't brought Detective Foot up in a while, but throughout this entire investigation, Ken has kept his promise and he has kept Detective Foot in the loop with every move he's made. But by now, even Detective Foot is like, dude, I've given you everything I have, and I want to see this case solved just as bad as you do. But unfortunately, I have a desk full of new cases that need my attention more than this ice cold case.
It's the truth, and networks hate that answer because it doesn't make for good television. Like watch any
Mhm.
episode of Cold Case Files when there's a certain point when the investigation goes cold, and the our job as producers then is to drag information out of those cops. What did you do in those cold years? Because a
Yeah.
lot of times the reality is it does just sit because they have more pressing cases. Like from a TV standpoint, you know, it makes for bad television when they're like, we didn't do anything. We just went on to other cases, even if it's the truth. And families also, I feel like, hate that answer when they get it from police because why aren't you
Mhm.
work? You got nothing to do. Why aren't you working my family's case? It's because I have 100 other families that are going through stuff too. So
I
it's
know.
little behind the scenes.
No, it's awful, and I think it might be in the 2020, but someone's talking about how Detective Foote, really was passionate about this case, but apparently a lot of times sex crime units, those detectives may get pulled to homicide. So then they're already overworked,
Hmm.
and now they don't even have time to investigate their own sex, like their department's crimes, because they get pulled to
Right.
homicide. Because understandably, a murder is higher priority, I guess, than a sexual assault.
It is, but a murder that's gone cold is not really a priority. Like you've done the initial investigation,
Exactly.
you've turned over every rock and you haven't found anything. And this is why cold case teams are so important around. If there
Mhm.
was infinite amount of money in the world and it could all go to cold case teams, do you know how many cases would be solved? It's because those dedicated teams then can focus on that one case or several cases instead of working these other little cases that come up. So that's my
I
soapbox.
love when we hear about a department opening a cold case unit. Like,
Mhm.
that's
It's so
so
important.
awesome. I think between cold case units and enough money and people to run all this DNA in the backlog,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, so many
Thousands,
crimes would be solved.
thousands of cases would be solved.
Well, back to our story. Ken cannot and will not let this go. He already believed that way too many sexual predators got away with their evil crimes, and the thought of this mystery monster walking among us and looking for his next victim, Ken was not going to allow that. So, we're going to head back to New Orleans, and the city's in a bad way, as is the suspected home base of our suspect. But as we know, Ken is a badass and doesn't let a natural disaster stop him. You see, Ken has a good buddy, one of those friends in high places, Captain Ernest Dema of the New Orleans PD.
Mm.
So I'm going to pause Ina's investigation for just a moment, and we're going to talk about what led to Captain Dema's and Ken Brennan's kind of bromance, and what led to Dema's nickname for Ken, which was Batman. So, years prior to Ina's case, Ken had been vacationing with his kids in the French Quarter in New Orleans, and Captain Dema had been transporting a prisoner who somehow had gotten out of Dema's grasp and fled. So Dema and his fellow officers start running after the prisoner. And as Dema tells it, quote, and out of nowhere comes this guy in a black jacket flying down the sidewalk who runs him down, tackles him, and held the guy until my men could subdue him. He was fantastic. End quote.
I take it all back. Your love of Ken Brennan is warranted. He's a badass.
He's such a badass.
He is.
Like, oh, and because of this, Dema and Ken had become like cop bros for life. And in the Vanity, I love this, but in the Vanity Fair article, the author Mark Bowen writes, quote, New Orleans may have been down for the count, but when Batman called, Dema was up for anything. End quote. Like, how is Ken even real?
That's a good question. They're few and far between people like Ken. And the guys who will
Mhm.
just like stop at nothing to catch a bad guy, but the ones that do, I have the utmost respect for because they're invested and they're sometimes a family's only lifeline. That's why they're
Mhm.
called heroes. How many guests have we had on that said, "So and so is my hero"? Because that's all a
Yeah.
family has to hold on to. It's their hope of finding justice, and I feel like if I were ever in a situation like they were, that I would want a guy like Ken fighting for my loved one.
Just admit you have a crush on Ken too. This is a safe space.
I do.
You can do it. It's
I
fun.
do.
Exactly. He's wonderful. So Ken asked Captain Dema, can you help me out with this? And of course, Captain Dema's going to do anything for Batman. So he sends one of his guys to the stadium, and like there's a ton of people on site because they were trying to get everything cleaned up and put back to rights in hopes of like having a season in 2006. So they're trying to clean up all the mess from the hurricane and get things in order, and hopefully, because it was still Zephyr's field at that point.
Mhm.
So Dema's officer asks around and he reports back to Dema. Dema calls Ken and tells him, I have good news and bad news.
Uh-oh.
The good news is I've got a name. So Ken takes a deep breath and he asks, what's the bad news? Captain Dema says, quote, his name is Mike Jones. There's probably only 1 million of them, and he doesn't work there anymore, and nobody knows where he went.
Oh,
End quote.
bummer. Like I was Jeez, yeah, pick a more common name too. Like literally every card in the deck is stacked against Ken. Mike Jones. Good lord.
And wasn't there a rapper named Mike Jones?
There's a million people named Mike Jones. There's a
Yeah, it's
million
like
Mike
John
Joneses.
Smith.
Yes.
I know.
Good luck.
Well, in the words of Joe Dirt, Ken just keeps on keeping on, and yet again, he is undeterred. It's like each hit that this man takes, he just gets up and is more powerful each time. He's like the little engine that could, but he's like the sexy PI that would.
My my eyes physically can't roll back any further in my head. You Kenji, get a room. We'll invite John Walsh, make it a party.
Stop it! Are you a genie granting my number one wish?
Ugh.
All right, well, now we have a name, which Ken compares to the Airport Regency guest list, and right there is the name Mike Jones.
Excellent.
He's booked the same week as the boat show. He checked in on February 14th, which was 7 days prior to Inna's attack, and he checked out the day after her attack.
Wow.
Which also means he checked out an entire day after he made that early morning trip with his suitcase that we never
Yeah.
saw again.
So he was just chilling like nothing happened.
Yep. So Ken is able to access the room's payment record, and there was a Visa card on file belonging to Michael Lee Jones. But we knew this wasn't going to be easy because after all this progress, Ken takes another hit.
I'd be taking a hit too, and several probably. How stressful this investigation is.
That kind of hit.
Oh.
So Ken finds out that the Visa card was no longer active, and the address it was linked to was a property in Virginia that Mike Jones had moved out of like years prior. So again, I feel like at this point, anyone else would have given up. Like my lazy ass would have been out like months ago.
Oh yeah, this is one of 1,000 reasons you should never work in law enforcement, like or 911 operator or
Anything with people, really. But you know what? As we've learned in the last however long I've been telling this episode, Ken is definitely not a lazy ass, and he's definitely not just anyone. And the Vanity Fair article made a really good point. I'm summarizing, but the author, he basically said that what really kept Ken going was just the absolute calmness of Mike Jones in that footage. Like, this douche had a woman's broken body shoved in a goddamn suitcase, and he's strolling along like it's no big deal. He's just out and about enjoying the day. And Ken was just so driven by the fear and the disgust of Mike Jones being out there walking among us and hunting his prey.
It blows me away the fact that Ina's not even dead. Like, this isn't a murder, but Mike Jones probably thought it was. So I guess that counts as like he tried to kill her, just didn't work.
Yeah, I feel like he thinks like he did.
Yeah, me too. At this point, he probably has no idea she's alive.
Mm-hmm. So all of this led to Ken's next move. Where was Mike Jones now? He wasn't working for Centerplate, but Ken's like, the chances of him working a similar job makes the most sense, especially for a serial rapist. Like, if you travel all over, you don't stay in one place for long. And as disgusting and foul as this is like essentially the perfect setup for a monster like Mike Jones.
Sure is.
So Ken begins searching for companies that were similar to Centerplate. So he just starts cold calling the HR departments at each company, and he's asking if they currently employ or had ever employed a Michael Lee Jones or Mike Jones. Now, when I first read that, I was like, what kind of company just gives this information out? Like, I don't feel like that's safe. But then I realized you can very easily call a company pretending to do a new hire reference check, and like the HR department's going to give you the dates of the person's employment, or at the very least check their records and confirm if the person had ever been there.
I feel like you've done this before. That the way you said that was too off the cuff. But it
No
also
comment.
like I wonder if things change, and I don't know the answer to this if you're a cop. Like, I know a warrant or a subpoena trumps everything, but I wonder if you call and say that you're calling in regards to an attempted murder or a murder case, if they're more willing to provide information given your status as law enforcement.
Well, probably, but Ken technically isn't either of the, like, he's not a
Right.
cop, he's a PI. So
Right.
he can't legally, I feel like, do much.
Right.
I don't know. But anyway, I don't know how like Ken went about getting this information. I don't know what he said, but he's calling all these companies and he's getting answers, but all of the answers are nope, he doesn't work here, nor has he ever. Sorry. So he's going down the list and he sees one company in the list that was headquartered in Tampa, Florida. And Ken actually had like business in that vicinity. So he's like, maybe I should just stop in there real like quick for a little, hey there, how are ya? So that's what he does. And when he gets to the headquarters of the company, which is called Ovations, he's able to meet with the COO, which is the chief operating officer. Well, this person turns out to be way less helpful than all of the other people on Ken's journey. Ken explains his situation to the COO and asks if the company employed a Mike Jones, and he gives a description of him. And this sounds just like a movie scene, but the head honcho guy, he doesn't even move a muscle. And he's like, he basically says to Ken, you're not a cop and you don't have a subpoena. So let me think about it. No. So, but hold on. Immediately, Ken is thinking, jackpot, he definitely works here. Everyone else had been super helpful. They checked their records and like they told Ken it was a no-go on Mike Jones. But this guy clearly has no poker face because he's like, nope, not telling you
He's
anything.
pretty
Well,
blunt.
why? Yeah. So Ken knows he has his answer on Mike Jones' employment, but he presses the guy further and asks him, quote, why would you want someone working for you who's a rapist? End quote.
Hmm.
And Mr. Fancy Pants COO tells him to get a subpoena.
Is there by chance video of that conversation?
No, why?
Well, because I'm wondering how the COO said it. Like, I know we read it, you read the text and
Yes.
you see it in your head, but like maybe he said it like get a subpoena, like leading him.
It's so funny that you said that. Like, you need to stay out of my brain, sir. But I was thinking that too. Like, maybe he was saying it like a dick, like very uncooperative. Or yeah,
Yeah.
maybe he was like, get a subpoena, hint, hint, wink, wink.
Yeah, right.
But
So
either way, no matter how he said it, Ken is like, you want a subpoena? Fine. So Ken calls Detective Foot. He explains the situation and he's like, I need the subpoena. And within minutes, the subpoena is sent to Ovations and they confirm they do have a Michael Lee Jones employed with the company.
Amazing.
We are so damn close now. So Ovations reveals that at that time, Michael was working for them at a minor league baseball stadium in Frederick, Maryland. So again, always keeping his word, Ken calls Detective Foot, gives him all the information, and he says, go get him. And Foot is completely floored. Foot floor, pun not intended.
Womp womp.
But anyway, I'm sure he's a little skeptical, but I feel like at this point he probably knows better than to question Ken. So Detective Foot and his partner hop a flight from Miami, Florida to Frederick, Maryland, and they head over to Harry Grove Stadium, which, by the way, is the home of the Frederick Keys, which, as I said, they are a minor league baseball team. We have some of those, right? Like the Reading Phillies and the Iron Somebodies.
Yeah, the Iron
somewhere.
Somebodies. Yeah, it's the Iron Somebodies. No, it's like, think of it like around here you would start in Reading, and then if you're good enough, you get called up to Lehigh Valley, the Iron Pigs, and then
Oh,
and then from there at any point you could get called up to the Phillies, major leagues.
got it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes those games are more fun than real baseball.
They're hilarious because there's mascot
Yeah.
racing around. There's hot dogs being. I mean, the minor league baseball is 10 times more fun than major league baseball.
And it's 10 times cheaper.
Yeah, those bastards from Ovations or with center plate.
Yeah, right.
Can't
Charging
get
you
you there.
$75. Yep. So Detective Foot and his partner, they land in Maryland and they head straight over to the stadium. And there, standing in a concession stand, slinging barbecue, is Michael Lee Jones.
Excellent.
Now, Detective Foot and his partner, they didn't actually just show up and surprise Mike. I honestly don't know why they didn't just show up, but they didn't. Foot had called Michael and kind of vaguely explained the reason for the call. He said, there had been an incident at the boat show back in February of 2005, and they just wanted to have a little chat with him about it. And to Foot's surprise, like over the phone, Mike Jones is super polite. He's super soft spoken. He answers all of Foot's questions, and he is perfectly happy to meet with the detectives. He even gives them directions on how to get to the stadium and like how to get into where he'll be working.
Of course he does. I mean, look at how cool and calm this guy has been the entire time. So, like, I'm not surprised. It's part of his persona. It's the character that he's playing.
That's a good point. You're right.
Yeah.
But Foot is feeling more and more sure that Mike isn't the guy. Like,
I was gonna say that too. Like, or he's not the guy.
or he's not the guy. Right. Yeah. And, Foot is like, would a rapist really be that kind and agreeable? Well, this feeling gets even stronger when he and his partner meet Big Mike in person. So Foot and his partner get to the stadium and they first spend a little time like watching Mike. And he seems very cheerful. He seems to have a very good relationship with his coworkers. There's no alarm bells going off for Foot or for his partner. And the alarm bells, they honestly continue to stay silent as they walk over and introduce themselves to Mike. And like, they're definitely a little taken aback by his massive, somewhat intimidating size. But upon speaking with him, they were like immediately at ease. He was calm, polite, he was friendly. He wasn't like overly friendly, but definitely welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, this was mentioned a few times in the Vanity Fair article, but like apparently Mike's voice was like super odd to people because here's this huge dude who looks like he should have Rick Astley's voice. But, like, instead he has the voice that Rick Astley should have. Does that make sense?
Never gonna give myself up.
So, Foot and his partner and Mike go to this private area outside of the stadium, and they begin their line of questioning. And one of the things that Foot asks is if he had met anyone who stood out well in Miami. And Mike calmly responds that he had met a woman and they had hooked up. So, Foot was like, oh, all right, well, can you tell me what this woman looked like? And Mike Jones responded with, quote, "I only have sex with white women," end quote.
Missing out. Just saying.
So Foot presses him a bit more and asks if he had had sex with anyone staying at the airport Regency. Mike is still calm and not even the least bit rattled, but he explained that no, the woman had not stayed at the Regency. She had been working at the boat show, and that's how he met her. So Foot's next question was if he had had sex with a blonde woman or maybe a foreign woman. And Mike says the woman wasn't a blonde, but yes, she was foreign. In fact, she was German. Throwback to Nicole Brown, who, as we learned from our wonderful friend Tanya, Nicole was born in Germany.
She was.
And yes, I call Tanya our friend. I'm just deciding that anyone we have on the show is our bestie, whether or not they want to be, kind of like I did with you.
I'd argue, but you're not wrong. I mean, your plan worked, so go for it.
So Mike says the woman he hooked up with in Miami was a non-blonde, white German woman. So at this point, Detective Foot is just annoyed. He came all the way to Maryland and he's just like, this is not the guy. Not to mention that Detective Foot hated the cold weather and spring in Maryland can be quite chilly. They made a huge deal of this in the Vanity Fair article. Hell, he was shivering under his mustache or something. Foot is irritated and he thinks he's wasting their time and he finally just blurts out, quote, "Look, I've got a girl who was raped that week. Did you have anything to do with it?" End quote. Which, I'm sorry,
He's
isn't there
done.
an arc of interrogation? Yeah, he's over it.
Yeah, he's over it.
But Mike is absolutely shocked and he has just the right amount of horror mixed in and he immediately says, quote, "No, of course not. No way." End quote. So Detective Foot is still not beating around the bush because the next thing he asks Mike is, quote, "You didn't beat the shit out of this girl and leave her for dead in a field down there?" Mike responds, "Oh, no. To which Foot follows up by asking if Mike would willingly provide a DNA sample. To Foot's surprise, Mike Jones agrees immediately.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah. So now Foot is like, this was a giant waste of time. This guy is clearly not our guy. No guilty person would happily give up their DNA. I'm cold as shit and I want to go home. Not his exact quote, but pretty damn close, I'm sure. So Foot and his partner have Mike sign a consent form. They swab the inside of his mouth and they bid the big man adieu. So immediately upon leaving Mike, Detective Foot calls Ken and he's like, "Dude, this is not the guy." And Ken, Ken, he says to him, quote, "No, man, he's definitely the fucking guy." And he totally says it like that, the guy.
I believe it.
Yep. So we all know, we were just talking about this a little while ago, how long DNA results can take. On Law & Order SVU, Olivia gets those results back from the lab in mere minutes. But in real life, it takes months. And it seems like there's always a ridiculously long backlog. Again, we said earlier in this episode. So while Ken is impatiently waiting for the results, he decides to go on a little trip with his son, some father-son bonding time, if you will. And where do father and son go to bond?
When you're the son of Ken Brennan, I would guess Maryland. Just to get more answers. This guy's relentless.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ken and his son fly to Maryland and they spend 3 days talking to Mike Jones. And Jones just continues to deny that he had anything to do with the vicious rape and brutal attack of a woman in Miami. So now months are going by and Detective Foot and Ken are busy with other projects. Foot has his hands full in Miami with all these different crimes. And Ken, well, my guess is he's riding his motorcycle, busting perps, and looking damn fine while he does it. So then one day in October of 2006, so this is a year and a half since Ina's actual attack, and this is 11 months since Ken took the case. But Ken gets a call from Detective Foote.
God, I swear to God, if this is another dead end, I'm leaving this this recording, and you're gonna finish by yourself because I cannot take any more twists and turns.
Well, Detective Foote says, you aren't gonna believe this. The DNA found inside of Inna was a match to Mike Jones.
Why would this guy provide a DNA sample? You know, I mean, they're going to get it anyway. And this, we saw this in the Susan Woods case where Joseph Scott Hatley was cornered 20, 30 years later, whatever. I forget how many years it was, but they basically have him in a room and they're like, well, you know what? I mean, if you can solve this right now, just give us your DNA. And he has no choice to say yes, because if you say
Yeah.
no, you're automatically guilty. So you might as well kind of roll the dice and hope there's like some screw up at the lab with the sample.
Oh, for sure. And it does turn out that Mike had used a condom with Inna, but it broke and he didn't know about it.
Oh, wow.
So he probably thought he was fine to give
That's
the
why he would be
DNA.
like, yeah, okay. That makes
Yes.
sense. Yeah, that's his best chance at a defense at that point.
Right. Wow. This is the crazy part about this case, though, is we're not even done. So Ken and Detective Foote fly back to Maryland and arrest Mike. He's charged with several felonies having to do with assault, kidnapping, and of course, rape. I personally feel like he should have been charged with attempted murder, but I didn't see anything about that in the Vanity Fair article, so I don't know why.
Gotcha.
So they take Mike to the Frederick Police Department, and I'm going to read you what Mark Bowden, the author of the Vanity Fair article, wrote to describe this scene. He writes, quote, "The accused sat forlornly in a chair that looked tiny under his bulk. In an austere Frederick Police Department interrogation room, great rolls of fat falling on his lap under an enormous Baltimore Ravens t-shirt. He repeatedly denied everything in a surprisingly soft voice, peculiar for such a big man, gesturing broadly with both hands, protesting but never growing angry, and insisting that he would never, ever, under any circumstance, do such a thing to a woman." End quote.
Hmm.
My first thought was like, why are we fat shaming? But then I'm like, he's a rapist. Fat shame him all you
Yeah,
want,
I think,
guys. Go
yeah,
for it.
it's very descriptive too. I mean, he's a great writer. I mean, I knew exactly what
Right?
you could picture it.
Yeah, I just thought that his description painted such a vivid picture, and like this dude is sitting there acting like a sad puppy who lost his way, and like his demeanor seemed to trick and manipulate like everyone around him, but not our man, Ken Brennan. He saw through him the whole time.
Batman.
Batman. So, while under interrogation, Mike claims that while he did often pay women for sex, he had never had any problems with them, and he certainly didn't hurt them. So, police show Mike the pictures of Inna when she got to the hospital. Her shattered eye socket, her battered body, her swollen jaw. And they ask him, if you have never hurt a woman, tell us how this woman ended up like this and had your DNA inside her.
Mhm.
So now, all of a sudden, Mike's like, all right, well, I did have sex with this woman, but, quote, she was a hooker, end quote. He went on to say that he paid her $100, they had sex, and that was that. He didn't hurt her. She was fine and well when they went their separate ways. But he does say that she was super drunk.
I mean, obviously they were hookers or whatever. And, we were talking, they were like, we want to have some fun.
And then what happens next? Do you go to her room? She go to your room?
Went to her room.
You went to her room.
Mm-hmm. And then, she whispers in my ear $100. So we did it and I gave her $100 and I left.
That's honestly his best defense at that point. Not to give any secrets away here, but if you say, "Yeah, we had sex, but I didn't see her after that. She left," that it explains the semen, and it also puts detectives in a position where they have to prove murder.
Right.
Know what I'm saying?
Yep. Well, he continues to deny hurting Inna and tells detectives, quote, "I did not hurt that girl. I'm not violent. I never hit a fucking woman in my whole fucking life. I'm not going to hurt her.
Sounds pretty violent.
Exactly. And with this response, it seems like Mike is beginning to become a little rattled. But even this change in his demeanor is still like minimal. So Ken continues to question Mike and he asks, why on earth did you roll your suitcase out to your car at 5 a.m. if you weren't leaving Miami or the hotel for like another day or two? Mike regains his calm and cool demeanor. Like it was like he had lost his cool for a second, but now he has it under control. And he responds like, oh, I got my days mixed up. I thought I was leaving that day.
Hmm.
So then Ken goes, okay, well, what was in that suitcase? And again, Mike calmly responds that the suitcase held some shoes, some clothes, and his Xbox.
What do you have in your bag when you went out to your car?
My clothes.
How much clothes did you have?
Once we were there, like, I think 2 weeks.
How much stuff? How big was your bag? How heavy was it? Was it barely light?
No, it was heavy. I had a bunch. I had my Xbox in there, all kinds.
Now, Ken's next question would be the one to finally trip Mike up again. Ken's like, okay, well, if you only had clothes and stuff like that in the bag, why was it so heavy? And Mike like looks at him like, what are you talking about? And Ken continues, well, it must have been heavy if you needed to give that suitcase that little yank to get off the elevator.
See the size of that Ravens t-shirt? You know how heavy that is?
Exactly. That, to be fair, it probably is. So Mike has to think for a second, but he goes, oh, actually, I have books in my suitcase. You see, I'm a total bookworm. That's me. Always got my nose in a book. So, with all that speed reading I do, I brought lots and lots of books. And by golly, those books are heavy.
What was the name of the books you were reading?
I have no idea. I couldn't even tell you what the name of the book was. Just took out my pocket.
So, like, of all the questions to get tripped up on, I feel like the book one is pretty lame. But anyway, even though we have the DNA match, Detective Foot and Ken realize that this case is weak. Like, let's look at the facts. Mike willingly gave up his DNA. He's been ridiculously compliant with everything law enforcement has asked of him. And he can explain away that DNA by saying that he and Inna had sex.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, even though he had originally lied about having sex with a blonde woman, Ken and Foot found out that he had a prior arrest for soliciting a sex worker. So he could just lie and say, like he could have said, I lied about having sex with her because he already had a charge for the same type of thing, and he was nervous.
There's a lot of like things that could go wrong in this case. I mean, the guy, for a perpetrator, he's doing a pretty good job, like keeping everything a secret, or like at least misleading police enough to give them pause.
Oh, for sure. And like all of this stuff is working against Ken and Foot. But unfortunately, Ina's not necessarily helping matters with like with her multiple accounts of what happened. Which again, so much head trauma. The language barrier. Like this poor girl had been through so much.
Or just show him a picture. Like, was this the guy? Did they ever try that?
She did pick Mike Jones out of a photo lineup, but any good defense attorney could argue that she had ridden the elevator with him and seen him around the hotel, and that's why she recognized his face.
It's true, and then it would be he said, she said in court.
Exactly.
So
what now? Well, you know how we've been taking like one step forward and two step back this whole time?
Swear to God.
Miami prosecutors are forced to make a deal with Michael the Monster Jones. Michael would plead guilty to sexual assault and would be sentenced to 2 years in prison in exchange for having the more like serious charges dropped.
Tell me that we just sat through 2 hours of this story and this guy's going to get 2 years in prison for this.
Okay, do you really think Ken, the badass babe Brennan, would just give up like that?
That's a good point.
No. But we do need to go back to the middle of our case. Do you remember when Ken had the Eureka moment with Mike casually strolling through the lobby with the suitcase?
Yeah, it's when he figured out that Inna was in it.
Well, right. And then Ken had that second epiphany, which was
That there's more, that he's responsible for others.
It's almost like he worked in true crime for like 20 years or something.
I mean, but these guys, they all fall into a certain bucket. And he's the exact type that would be responsible for something like this, for having more victims, because he's a traveler, travels alone. He has charges for paying to have sex with people. And
Mhm.
he's also like this kind of nondescript, normal looking dude who, like, very Ted Bundy. You would never see it
Yeah.
coming. So that's not surprising.
No, absolutely. So this whole time, Ken's gut feelings have been on point. So, like, he knows he can't ignore his gut feeling that Inna is not his first victim. So he calls Detective Foote and he says, quote, "This ain't a one fucking time deal. I'm telling you, this is this guy's thing. He's got a job that sends him all over the country. Watch him on that video. He's slick, nonchalant. He's too cool, too calm. You'll see it when you put his DNA into the system." End quote. And just so you know, the system he's referring to is CODIS, which is CODIS, which, as I'm sure our listeners at the MU Crime Crew know, it
Yes.
stands for Combined DNA Index System. And it's basically like this huge ass database that law enforcement people, like at all levels, like local, state, federal, they can upload DNA samples and then share them with other law enforcement people and like forensic laboratories. And these DNA profiles are from convicted offenders, arrestees, crime scene evidence, missing persons, and also unidentified human remains.
It's also internationally used. I think there's something like 50 countries have access to CODIS now, and like 100 law enforcement. You know what I mean? There's so many people that can use CODIS now, which is amazing.
It's incredible. So, anyway, we're like now in the winter of 2006 when Miami police finally get to upload Mike Jones's DNA in CODIS. And again, in Law and Order SVU, it's like Olivia and Detective Finn, they just have to hit one key and suddenly all the matches pop up.
Yep.
Like it's all right there on the computer.
Yeah.
But in real life, it can take months for the FBI to review the matches because the system comes up with the matches. Like, so yeah, the system can spit out the results pretty quickly, I guess, but then the FBI people, they have to give it a second look before it can be confirmed, which makes sense.
It matches markers, and you get a percentage that spits out. It's like 1 in 1 quadrillion or 220
Yeah,
quadrillion. So it's like a fraction or a ratio, I guess. Percentage.
it takes time and it
Mhm.
takes money. But wouldn't you know it, there were 3 matches,
Shut up.
3 unsolved cases, 3 unsolved assaults, 3 unsolved rapes.
Wow.
So case number 1 took place on May 5th, 2003 in New Orleans, and the victim, her name is out there but not readily available, so I chose not to name her, to be honest.
Good.
But she admitted she was a little intoxicated and she was ready to go back to her hotel after like the night out. So she's attempting to catch a taxi when a large, light-skinned black man with glasses pulled up to her and offered her a ride. And just like how he was with police, the man's demeanor is calm, quiet, almost like submissive. And our victim, she thanks the man and she gets in his vehicle, but according to her later testimony, the man took the victim to an abandoned lot where he proceeded to viciously rape and assault her. But this survivor is another badass babe because when her rapist tried to silence her by putting his big fat hand over her mouth, she bit him so hard she had his skin in her teeth.
Oh man, that's awesome though. Good for her. Fight back.
I know. I'm like so skeeved, but so proud of her at the same time.
Yeah.
So when the attacker fled, our victim reported her assault to the New Orleans Police Department. So they took the report and they took DNA from the semen left inside. And while they did load the DNA into CODIS, we already know that it would like sit there for years before being matched to Michael Lee Jones. Oh, and by the way, this woman was blonde.
Oh, you got a type.
So case number 2 was also in New Orleans. I honestly don't even have a date of when this happened, and I didn't go digging. Clearly this survivor wants privacy, but case 2 was also in New Orleans. Case 3 was technically Inna's rape and attack in Florida in February 2005. So case number 4, but like number 3 of the unsolved, was from Colorado Springs, Colorado. So Detective Terry Thumston of the Colorado Police PD Sex Crimes Division had worked on this case for over a year. On December 1st, 2005, a young blonde woman, clearly, like you said, he has a victim, she accepted a ride in the early morning from a big, light-skinned black man with glasses. He took the woman home, but then he somehow manipulated her into letting him inside the home. And once inside, he raped her, and in order to keep her screams muffled, he put his fat, meaty hand over her mouth, just like he did with our New Orleans victims.
So gross.
So when police compare notes, they're able to confirm that Michael Lee Jones had been in New Orleans and Colorado Springs at the exact time of the attack.
Nice.
So Michael does his 2 years in prison, and shortly before he's due to be released, he's extradited to Colorado to stand trial for the rape there. Sadly, though, the woman who had survived Michael's brutal attack, she had passed away prior to the trial. And I'm not sure how she died, but it supposedly was not related to the attack. So I'm not sure what happened there.
That sucks, though.
Well, and it sucks for a lot of reasons. Not only is that so tragic, but it's also bad news for the Colorado Deputy District Attorney, Brian Cecil. With this woman being deceased, he didn't have a victim. But obviously, this man took a page from Ken's playbook because he was not deterred. He wanted Michael Lee Jones off the streets. So he called Inna and one of the New Orleans victims to testify against Jones. And he was basically like, here are 2 women who can act as witnesses for their own attacks, and thus we're showing a pattern. So both Inna and the New Orleans woman pointed out Michael as their attacker, and of course, the prosecutor had the DNA evidence. And then the New Orleans survivor got up on the stand, and apparently she was so brave. She was so tough. She went up there on a mission.
Good for her.
And she very bravely told the entire courtroom everything that Michael Jones had done to her. She went into painstaking detail about that horrific night. Inna, unfortunately, didn't do such a great job on the stand, which, honestly, the prosecutor, I think, expected it. And, we know her memories were all over the place, because, again, the woman had such bad head trauma.
Yeah, and she's foreign.
Well, and she's got the language barrier, so that's causing an issue as well. But one of the random articles I came across literally called it a brain rattling injury that she had had.
Well, yeah, think about what she endured. Jesus.
Yeah, so give the woman a break. But
yeah.
Michael pled not guilty to everything in Colorado. And of course, his defense attorney made a huge deal of Inna's differing accounts. And then he got real shitty and tried to undermine each victim by saying that they were sex workers, which I guess his point was, who cares? And apparently the jurors, though, they didn't buy that shit for a second, because Michael the Monster Jones was found guilty and was handed down what essentially equates to a life sentence. It was he got X amount of years for this count and X amount of years for that count. And according to the Vanity Fair article, Michael, quote, will not be eligible for his first parole hearing until 2032. The state estimates his term will last until he dies, end quote.
It'd be great, but 2032 is not that far away.
No, that's terrifying.
Yeah, it is.
Now, I don't know, though, if potentially he could be charged in New Orleans. Like, I don't know if the statute of limitations is up. Like, I just don't know.
Yeah.
Inna ended up winning her civil suit against the hotel and their security company. She was rewarded with $300,000, which I don't think is anywhere near enough to make up for what she went through and what she
Right.
continues to go through, trying to heal. But I hope that wherever she is, whatever she's doing, she is doing well and living her best damn life because she deserves it.
I hope she's in a good place.
But I'm bummed. Well, Detective Foote has since retired from the Miami PD, and my man Ken, he is still out there kicking ass in Miami as a PI. And he truly believes that as more and more DNA is entered into CODIS, there will be more victims. He told Mark Bowden in the Vanity Fair article, quote, "The cases they got him on, they're just the tip of the iceberg. Once other jurisdictions start checking their DNA files on cases when this guy was at large, I guarantee you they will find more." End quote. And I certainly would not bet against Batman himself, Ken Brennan.
I would not either. What an absolute awesome story. Like this could be my favorite case that we've ever done. Seriously.
It's so insane. I am so happy someone sent this in.
Rosie.
The case was amazing. Yes, Rosie A. I encourage everyone to go read the Vanity Fair article entitled "The Vanishing Blonde" by Mark Bowden. And you can also watch the 2020 episode entitled "The Woman in the Suitcase," which is why I couldn't tell you the title at the beginning.
Exactly. Spoiler.
And possible future episode spoiler alert, maybe. Mark Bowden actually wrote a book about like 6 true crime cases, and a few of them were solved by Ken. So, of course, I bought the book, and maybe we'll get to cover another Ken case in the future. But
It'd be awesome.
For now, that is the case of the Vanishing Blonde and how it was solved by the real-life Batman.
No joke. It is my personal mission now to get Ken Brennan on this podcast just so I can watch you squirm as we interview him.
Stop it. You're making me sweaty.
Gonna happen.
Oh my God, I'm going to have like a panic attack.
I'm Googling him tonight.
I found him on LinkedIn. I didn't reach out because I didn't know if that'd be weird, but
When's your birthday?
Dear Ken,
December?
hi, I love you. Yes, December.
Well, get ready. You got your present lined up.
Yes. Ken popping out of a cake. Anyway, sorry. Listeners, we would love to hear your thoughts on Ken and this case as well. So you can hit us up on our socials, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Murder Unscripted. You can email us, murderunscriptedpod@gmail.com, or you can message us through our website, www.murderunscriptedpod.com. We appreciate you guys to the moon and back. And until next week, be safe, be kind, and remember, perverts don't wear signs that say they're perverts.
They do apparently have blonde hair and wear green sweaters.
Hey-o! Listeners, I'm wearing a green sweater and I got blonde hair. Bye!